Good evening to our viewers in Germany and hello to our viewers in the United States. I'm Steve Sokol, the president of the American Council on Germany, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's conversation. In December, the Green Party joined a three-party coalition government led by the Social Democrat Olaf Schholzs. And in late January, Ricarda Lang became the youngest co-chair of Germany's Green Party. She is relatively new in the Bundestag, but she brings an extensive background of activism on equity issues to the party leadership. Her co-chair, Omid Nuripur, who many of our members know, brings experience to this role. And together, Ricarda and Omid hope to strengthen the image of the Green Party as the moral compass of the German government. The ACG and the Heinrich Böll Stiftung are very pleased to have the opportunity to speak with Ricarda Lang today. Ricarda, herzlich willkommen, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation.
Well, there are a lot of issues that I'd like to talk with you about today. Of course, at the moment, there is a lot going on. In the past month, we have seen a war breakout in Ukraine. Germany has seen an influx of refugees from Ukraine. At the same time, Germany is struggling to dampen the daily number of COVID cases. There are concerns over energy and rising inflation. And taken together, there's just a tremendous strain on the social fabric in Germany. As a member of the three-party Ampel-Koalition, the Greens, which head both the Foreign Ministry and the Ministry of Economics and Energy, have taken on an important role in shaping some of the social priorities of the new German government. And that's certainly something that I would like to talk to you about today. But given the dire situation in Europe, I think we have to start by talking about Ukraine. In the run-up to the election last year, and during the coalition negotiations, outsiders heard that the Green Party, or having the Green Party in the government, might make it more likely for us to see a hawkish German foreign policy vis-a-vis Russia and China. And we also saw in the coalition agreement that there would be a commitment to something called a feminist foreign policy. And of course, the Green Kanzlerkandidatin, Annalena Baerbock, is the foreign minister. So there have been a lot of different transitions. I guess my first question to you is, how have the Greens helped shape Germany's response to the crisis in Ukraine?
Well, I think the last few months for us, or even more specifically the last few weeks for us as Green Party, have been a really challenging time. Because on the one hand, many things we have proposed throughout the elections and election campaigns have now gained a new importance. For example, we were always the party proposing and also campaigning against Nord Stream 2, because we always said this is not an unpolitical issue, this is not a strictly economic issue, but this is an issue of geopolitical importance. This is a question of European sovereignty, and this is the question of dependence of Russia and therefore Vladimir Putin. And now we have stopped Nord Stream 2, so in one way we were on the right side of history when it comes to this. And on the other hand, we have to face new challenges and new questions that kind of go against many things that the Greens have proposed in the past. For example, we just agreed within the German government that we will send weapons to Ukraine. The German Green Party was always against weapons in areas of war. And we were always saying that the diplomatic way should have the priority. But now we saw for many weeks, and I mean, I personally saw it because I'm rather close to her, how Annalena Baerbock flew through the world like crazy and tried to to propose peace and also to hold peace within Europe in a diplomatic way. But we also saw how Vladimir Putin closed the door on this diplomatic way and how he started a war against the Ukrainian people, how he violates the rights, the lives of Ukrainian people, even going as far as bombing birth stations and stuff like this. And in this moment, for us, we said, well, if we believe that Ukrainian people, and I wholeheartedly believe this, have a right to self-defense, then it is also our job to give them the means they need to really fulfill this right, to really use this right. And therefore, for the Green Party, it has been such a contradictory phase, because on one hand you could say, oh, this is something that we've always proposed for. On the other hand, you have to say, well, we have to think new. And I think what we could give to this government at the moment is, on the one hand, being a party that really focuses on the reality and really says, well, not just we said this 2 weeks ago, we said this 2 years ago, but really said what is needed in the reality at the moment. And I think the second thing we really bring to this government is a human rights-based kind of foreign policy and human rights-focused kind of policy. And I think if this crisis at the moment shows us something, is it human rights based or like foreign politics based on human rights, feminist foreign policy, are not soft issues. Not soft issues where you could say, on the one hand, there's like the hard foreign politics, and on the other hand, there's like human rights and the feminist stuff. Well, now we see that a really strict feminist foreign policy, a really strict human rights foreign policy is much more harder on authoritarian regimes like Russia, much more harder on the ones fighting democracy than the foreign policy in the last year that was kind of more on a neutral and I think also depoliticized foreign policy. And I think this would be the last thing I want to say to the first question. In Germany, there was, and I think also in many other European countries, but Germany maybe the most, this thought of Wandel durch Handel, transition to trade. And the main thought behind this way of doing foreign politics was that if you really strengthen the economic bonds to countries like Russia, who have a really problematic stance on human rights, who are authoritarian, the thought that if we just get close enough to them economically, will prevent wars from happening and also will change these countries from within. But I think now we have seen, the thought was, if we're close economically, we can't have a war in Europe. And now we see that exactly the opposite is happening. We have the war in Europe, but we are so closely economically to them that it is really hard for us to take action. For example, if we lose gas imports, if we lose fossil imports. And therefore, I think this really has to change, and this is really changing, especially for Annalena Baerbock, that economics should not be on the forefront when it comes to peace, when it comes to human rights, and when it comes to foreign policy, not just because of softer issues, but also because this way of doing foreign policies has made us weak as Europe, because it had made us dependent on those we are actually opposing.
So you've put a lot on the table, and I really appreciate that, because there are a lot of different topics to pick up on. I think one of them, is that many people, of course, watched Annalena Baerbock, and you talked about how she put a lot of time and energy into taking diplomatic measures. There were a number of people when she started in her role as foreign minister who were skeptical as to how well she would do, and she really pushed back against the Russian foreign minister Lavrov and has really been very outspoken. And it has, you described sort of a contradictory phase for the German Green Party, but it's been interesting to see how there's really been an evolution in the thinking of the party in this relatively short period that the government has been in place, of trying diplomacy, but then also having to make some changes based on the realities that exist. And so I thank you for sort of spelling that out for us. And I guess I have two follow-up questions. One is, I think a lot of people were very surprised when Olaf Scholz made his speech on the 27th of February in front of the Bundestag and really announced a major foreign policy and security policy pivot for Germany, moving away from Wandel durch Handel, moving away from the interdependence, supplying arms to Ukraine, but also investing much more in German defense. Was this something that took you and your colleagues by surprise, or did this fit with sort of the direction that you and others in the Green Party were thinking?
Well, I think you could say that the exact moment and the exact number that he proposed was actually taking a lot of people from the Green Party by surprise. But I think the question that we have to invest more when it comes to defense and also military defense, specifically, this was something that was on the table within the government, but also within the Green Party for way longer. And I think it's kind of interesting because now I hear a lot of points of view that are saying, well, this must be so hard for the Green Party because the Green Party has been a pacifist party and we have a history coming from the peace movement, which is true. This is part of our DNA as a party. But I think it's too easy to just put this on the Green Party because actually this is something that many, many people within Germany share, even going through the different parties. I think Germany within the last especially 10 to 20 years, but also coming from our historic position as Germany, has always been a country where the majority of our people have been more leaning towards a more pacifist, if not pacifist in a narrow view, kind of way, saying no weapons at all, but more diplomatic way, spending a little less on the army and stuff like this. And so this kind of puts many, many people, and the majority, I think, of our people in a situation where we have to rethink how we look at our army, how we look at spendings on defense, and especially also the conservatives, because now they are like, well, finally something is happening, which is kind of funny to look at if you see that they have had the Ministry for Defense for 16 years. And actually in this time, the money did not necessarily go down, but the actual capacity of our army actually went down. So I think this is a necessary question we ask ourselves: how much do we want to spend on the army? And I think it's good that we are increasing our spendings. Still, there are two things from a green point of view that need to happen simultaneously to that. And one of that is reforms within the army, because actually Germany in the last 10 years has not been spending little money compared to other countries, but little of that money has really led to better equipment, to more strengthened our army, strengthened our soldiers. So I think we have to talk about management, where we get the weapons, how to really use that money, and also how to use it on a more European level. I think it would be rather sad if now Germany starts to buy, Poland starts to buy, everybody starts to buy, and in the end we spend a lot of money, but don't have a strategy. So I think if we talk about sovereignty, it always has to be not just the German army, not just German sovereignty, but European sovereignty and European strategic capacity to gain sovereignty. And the second question is that we have to talk about what security really means in the 21st century. It does mean military defense, and also better military defense than we have had in the last years. But it also means energy sovereignty. The question of how we get independent, it means cybersecurity. And I think all these questions, what a security that fits to the year 2022 and how to get the money capacity we need for that, this is something we are bringing into discussion as a Green Party at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that. One of our viewers submitted a question that really goes sort of along these lines and writes that obviously as a consequence of the invasion of Ukraine, the coalition government decided to increase its defense budget, to invest in the Bundeswehr, to increase its contribution to NATO, and even to send military equipment to Ukraine, all of which you've touched on. But our viewer asks how much of a challenge this policy shift was for the Green Party. And you've started to talk about that a little bit, but I think more pointedly, the viewer wants to know whether this new position could be reversible once the situation in Ukraine improves, or whether this Zeitenwende, this new German foreign and security policy, is really here to stay.
I think it's here to stay because we can't go back. I mean, we had with the speech of Joe Biden, there has been also a debate going on within Germany when he was talking about regime change and the question of what comes after Putin. I don't think now is the right time to really say this needs to happen, because now the question of forefront is the weapons need to stop. The war within Ukraine needs to stop. But I think it is clear for everybody we will not go back to having tea with the Russians and having normal talks. And there's no going back and ignoring the next one. No going back when it comes to our relations to Russia, but also no going back when it comes to our understanding as the European Union security-wise. And I think this really has changed fundamentally. One aspect of that is rather interesting is that NATO, I think, has gained more importance throughout the last weeks, when I think it was the goal of Vladimir Putin to weaken the transatlantic bond, the Western world, even though I always think the West was such a, like, making it really too easy. But if you want to talk about the Western world and also NATO, and I think he has actually, the result of his action was the opposite of what he wanted. There has been a closer cooperation within NATO, and NATO in many ways has really taking like a role in the in the foreign policy system, which it has not taken throughout the last years, to be honest. So I think on the one hand, there's more orientation back to also these partnerships. On the other hand, we have really seen, well, Europe and especially Germany and our eastern countries within Europe, they have a vulnerable situation with where they stand, and therefore a Europe that is able to defend itself and that is able to act on itself is so important. I think this is something that is here to stay, and even if what we all want, what is our most important goal, if we can end the war in Ukraine, when this happens, only the Ukrainian people decide upon it. I think this is also important because there's been some talks in the German, like, newspapers from some authors and stuff like this, giving tips to Zelensky when he should, like, give up. And I think this is really astonishing how people think they would be in a position to tell the Ukrainian people when to give up. They decide about this and they have our support. But our goal is that the war ends. But what the questions this war has raised, they will stay longer than even the situation is. And I think when you talk about the Green parties, how it is for our members, I think it is rather interesting because I have like an election district, which is in Baden-Württemberg, Swabia, and there's the Mutlanger Friedenshütte. This is, I mean, translates to Mutlanger, which is a place, location, peace hut. And this was one of the birthplaces of the German peace movement. It was a place where Petra Kelly, one of the founding members of our party, was really like having like her first speeches and stuff like this. So many people that are part of the Green Party, where I come from, have joined the party because of the peace movement. They've joined in the 80s and the 90s because of peace politics. And those people at the moment, they're not like, well, you're contradicting everything we stand for. They are actually really taking this situation with a big responsibility and with a big focusing on what is needed in reality. But I think for them, it raises a lot of questions. What do peace politics mean in the year 2022? What does this mean for us as a party? And I think if we do our job right, and I hope I'm taking part of doing the job right, we as a party can be in a democracy, a place where these questions are discussed. Because many people are looking for orientation at the moment, orientation which we give with events like these. And I think a party can be a place where in difficult times, people find orientation, find debate, because the answers are not simple. I think Robert Habeck has put it rather well when he was talking in the German Bundestag, the same day that Olaf Scholz gave his speech, and he was talking about supporting Ukraine with weapons, which he has proposed, I think, over a year ago. So he was someone that was for delivering of weapons for a longer time. And he said, well, I think it is the right decision, but I don't know if it is a good decision. And this applies to so many things we are doing at the moment. You can choose which is the least bad decision. You can choose which is the right decision, because you have to be able to act. But they are not good decisions. They're not decisions anybody wants to take, and they're not black and white. And I think to also have a place to ask, to maybe even doubt, but then to be able to act, this is what parties can suffice at the moment.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, in as much as this is an incredibly complex, volatile, and uncertain period that we're all experiencing, and there are no easy answers to address the current challenges. many of the situations that we're experiencing right now have been sort of in development or in process for years, not just overnight. And so, these are topics that people have been thinking about, but now we're confronted with a real challenge and a real war on the European continent. So I do agree with you that events like this, where we're able to talk openly about positions and about ideas, can be very helpful in terms of giving people a better understanding about different viewpoints. And so one thing I'd like to ask you to maybe help describe for us is this notion of feminist foreign policy, because I think some of our viewers might not really understand what hides behind that. You started to talk about it, that it's not just about hard power and soft power, but it is about a foreign policy that takes human rights into consideration. And so is there a sort of easy definition of what German feminist foreign policy looks like?
I don't think there's a really easy definition. I have had a lot of talks and hour-long debates on what it really means, and there's so many people, for example, Christina Lunz from the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy in Germany, that have written books about it. For me, I think it constitutes of three major points. First, in general, for me, a feminist foreign policy is a foreign policy that aims at equity and equality and aims as a safe life of all human beings. And because in our society we live at the moment in a global patriarchy, this means especially proposing the human rights of women and girls. So it is focused on the universal right of a safe life and also equity and equality. But because we live in a patriarchy, this means feminist politics, especially support the rights of women and girls. And to get a little bit more specific, for me, three major key points are: first, representation of women, the role women play in foreign policies. This is not all it takes. So it's just not, if you do all like the foreign policies like you have done them before, but a woman is the foreign minister, it doesn't automatically translate to a feminist foreign policy. But I think it's more major point. And I think also we have seen that women being part of peace negotiations make the negotiations more durable, make them last longer. So I think this is also something that makes our politics better in general, because if we have more diverse people being part of the decision making, the decision work for more people, work for the whole of society. So this is the one point. I think the second point is for feminist foreign policies that are focused on an equal or just distribution of resources. Because we see that resource conflict is in many cases, the source of conflict for foreign conflict and also for crisis and also for wars. So to have equality when it comes to power, but also when it comes to economic resources and when it comes to things we need to survive, from food to water, and women having their fair share, but also other groups of society having a fair share, and therefore preventing conflicts. This for me is the second major point. And I think the third major point would be the eradication of gender-based violence, which is only possible through reducing violence in total and also reducing armed conflict. This does not mean in any case to have a stance against using military instruments. Like I said, I was supporting the decision to deliver weapons to Ukrainian people, but it means that on a larger scale, it is our goal to reduce armed conflicts and to reduce gender-based violence and to, create a world where especially girls can grow up in a safe environment, and then especially women can live in a safe environment, which would also mean to abolish gender-based violence as a war instrument, especially rape, which we have seen has really increased within the last years. And I think these all together for me make feminist foreign policy what I understand behind it. And I think what is really interesting about it is that it is thought especially from how to support women and girls, but I think it makes our politics better in general. And I think it's also a strategic device we can use against countries like Russia, but also other countries, because the fight against women's rights, also LGBT rights, is in the forefront to democracy-hating fascist countries. And therefore, I think for us, feminist foreign policy is also a strategic point we have to make as Western countries, as European countries, when it comes to conflicts.
Thank you, Ricarda. I'd like to maybe pick up on a couple of the themes that we've talked about so far, and then change the subject a little bit, because one of our viewers has asked a question that kind of pulls together the issues of human rights, the feminist foreign policy, but also the point that you made before of having sort of a coordinated military capacity in Europe. And our viewer writes, in the context of the European Union, human rights are at the center of the EU Charter for Fundamental Rights. Will the European Union, in light of geopolitical security and with a stance toward a feminist foreign policy, support the formation of an EU military force?
I think this is a really interesting question, because I see kind of a shift within our party debate when it comes to European army. This has been a debate within the Green Party for many, many years. And it has really been also kind of like really an exciting debate, because there's so different approaches and also kind of a hard fight it has been within our party. And now I see people that were always within the party debates opposing the European army suddenly saying, well, if we invest in the forces so much now, shouldn't we do it on a European level? And wouldn't there, in face of the existential crisis we are facing at the moment, the Ukraine country especially, but also the whole of Europe, shouldn't we talk about the European army? So I think there is kind of a new window that has opened, especially within the German debate. The one thing that many people, well, I think there has been two counter arguments within the party debate. One was more like, well, we don't want to have more military, and this would always mean more of it. And I think the other one has that it would not work, actually. It was more kind of a practical approach. And I think those practical arguments still are valuable. The question, if this would really lead to us having a more capable army and to really get this together without just losing a lot of material, losing a lot of resources. But I think that now we have to talk new about European security politics, and this also means European forces for me, because if we want to be sovereign, if we want to act together, and if we also now spend so much money within, it would be so stupid to not do it on a European level. It would be so stupid to do this nationally when it is totally clear that we need the European, that we all need all of Europe for it to work. So I would say at the moment, the European army is still kind of a vision and not something that will happen within the next years, but more European cooperation and also common or shared forces in special fields. This is something will happen in the next years, and it would also be supported by the Green Party.
One area, of course, where national cooperation, but also European cooperation is necessary, is dealing with the growing humanitarian crisis that is unfolding in Ukraine. According to some numbers that I saw, some 10 million people have already been displaced. According to the United Nations, some 4.5 million people have already left Ukraine. 2 million of them are in Poland. And official estimates report that more than 270,000 Ukrainian refugees have already arrived in Germany, but the actual number is likely to be far greater than that because not everybody has been registered and has checked in. Do you think that Germany is ready for the refugee crisis that's unfolding, and what makes this flood of refugees different from 2015 and 2016?
Yes, I think we are ready. We have a really big welcome culture at the moment within our society. So if you look at all parties, even, and I don't normally want to take them as an argument for anything, but I think in this case it is rather astonishing, even the voters of our right extremist parties, even there we have a majority for taking in refugees from Ukraine, and with all the other parties, it's like big majorities. So I think there's so many people from our cities to our federal states to the national level that are really willing to accept the refugees here, to support them. And we have said, and Baerbock has said this as a foreign minister, we will take all the people that need refugee. There will be no limit. There will be no sending people back. Everybody that has to flee the Ukraine will find refuge with us and with other European countries. But on the other hand, we also know that this welcome culture is not, the stability of this is not a given. It's not something that will be there forever, but it needs to work. And I think for it to work, this is something we are now working on. I think 3 things need to happen. First of all, the organization part. We need a better cooperation from like the communal or municipal level to the federal state level to the national level, taking in the people that help voluntarily and the people that are state-wisely in part of it, and for all of this to work together, especially when it comes to the registration. This is kind of a more difficult point at the moment because our ministry that is concerned with this subject at the moment is more leaning towards a way where we have no registration, which I can understand from the view that we should have not have a registration at the border and make people wait there. But I think we need to know who is here to support the people, not just from a security point, but also really like to support the people and know what is needed. So this needs to, I think we need to get better with that, and also with the financial aspects of how to support, especially the communes and the cities with doing this job. The second part is getting the people integrated in a fast way. So access to work, access to health, access to language courses. And there's a lot of things happening at the moment. Actually, like one thing that is rather difficult is childcare, because we have, and this is a big difference to 2015, like you asked, we mainly have women and children coming because the men have to stay in the Ukraine to fight. And so there's a lot of women, and the Ukraine has a high level of women working. So there is a lot of women coming that worked in the Ukraine, also want to work here, but because they're coming with other partner, they need kind of ways of childcare. So these practical questions are really like at the forefront now, how we can give the people a perspective here and how to get faster when it comes to integration. And I think the third point is the question of European distribution, because now we actually, and I would not have expected this, to be honest, a few months ago, all European countries are taking action. Also countries like Hungary, also countries like Poland, where we have had a lot of problems when it comes to the acceptance of refugees in the past, are now taking action. This is really good, but I think we need, apart from like acute help now, and all the countries, and especially Eastern countries, are taking the biggest share at the moment, we need a mechanism for European distribution to build up a resilient structure and to build up a resilient system. Because in the past, it's always like being driven by reaction-wise politics when it comes to refugees, has made us vulnerable, I think, as the European Union. So we need to build up resilient system when it comes to refugees. And I think the last thing I would like to add, we have a big difference to 2015. More women, more children. Also, the proximity to Ukraine is bigger. So I think everybody here knows someone from the Ukraine, knows someone whose parents come from the UK. But still, we need to be really careful not to give up the impression, well, now it works because it's the right refugees, because there's kind of like second class and first class refugees. But what we should take from this is that we as the European Union, we as Germany, are capable of helping people, are capable of supporting the human right, are capable of, supporting this historic learning that the world is taking with the right to asylum. And this is what we need to take from this crisis.
So, Ricarda, switching gears a little bit, we talked a little bit about Robert Habeck and another consequence of the crisis in Ukraine, namely energy dependence and energy diversity. And another issue that is high on the Green Party agenda, and that certainly came through during the election campaign last year, is, of course, energy and climate change. You participated in last week's talks to reduce energy costs. And this is incredibly important because there are so many people, not to mention companies, that are being affected by spiraling energy costs. Can you talk to us a little bit about where things stand and how you see things playing out in terms of helping German citizens cover the cost of energy moving forward?
Mm. Yeah, I think what we see at the moment is actually something like a fossil inflation. Because when there have been talks about a green inflation, the greenflation within the last year, people were saying like, well, climate protection is pushing up the prices. We see that actually the total opposite of this has happened. The lack of climate protection within the past, which has led to the dependency on fossil fuels, is actually now pushing up the prices because the fossil fuels are getting so expensive that we are actually experiencing a fossil inflation and now also inflation of everything, but we are dependent on Russia. And this has affected many people that are poor, but also way into the middle class when it comes to the prices of warming up the houses and heating, and when it comes to the prices of food, and also when it comes to the prices of petrol for the cars. And therefore, we have said as a coalition, as the Ampel coalition, we need to take action. We need to support these people. And we have kind of like within our, now we call it Entlastungspaket, there's three major areas. The first area is the direct monetary support. We have an Energiepreispauschale, which means all people who are paying taxes now working get 300 euros one time through their employers. And these are also taken into consideration with taxes. So there's kind of like a effect where those who have more have to give away more. So most money goes to the people that really need it. There's also money going to people who are dependent on the state, which are called Grundsicherung, 100 euro. And there's also people going to all children, to the child money, child care, child support. There's 100 euro added to that. And with that, I think we have, on the one hand, reached the wide of society of people affected, and also more goal-oriented, those who need it most get most. Then the second part, which was mobility. And this has been kind of a debate within our coalition, because for especially liberals have really been proposing we need to do something for the car owners. And I would also say we need to do something for the people who are using their cars a lot and have many kilometers, especially to get to work, the so-called Pendler. So now the tax on mineral oils is reduced within Germany for 3 months. But we as a Green Party said, well, we can't just support the people using their cars and therefore give more incentive to use cars, but we are also pushing forward public transport. And therefore we have something we now call 9 for 90. So for 3 months, 90 days, there will be tickets nationwide for 9 euros per month. And therefore, we are also supporting the people taking the bus and the train, and also giving incentive to switch to public transport, which is better when it comes to the dependency on oil and also when it comes to climate protection. And then, and this has really been like the strategic point of view from us as a Green Party, we have implemented within this Entlastungspaket measurements or measures to decrease our use of fossil fuels. Because when we say, well, we want to support people financially when using fossil fuels, which is something that is socially needed at the moment, we also need to have a plan how to reduce them. Because first, if we don't, we will always stay dependent. We are doing everything now to diversify our sources for energy, even as far as Robert Habeck going to Qatar, which is not easy to take for us as a Green Party. We've talked about human rights before. But we can't just take the same volume of energy and then just replace it with other things. This will not work, and it will also create new dependency, like, for example, look at Qatar now. So the volume in total has to be reduced. And therefore, we have to talk about efficiency. We have to talk about how to change the way we are heating our house. We have to talk about how to build in a different way. And we have really included these measures within the subject, which for us is also a social question, because if people will need to use less of fossil fuels, it would get cheaper for them, and it's a geopolitical question. I once said, in a little bit to really put your point, you could actually say that solar energy, wind energy, and also efficiency, they are protecting our freedom at the moment when we look at Europe.
So maybe as a quick follow-up, I mean, you've outlined a number of aid packages and a number of sort of short-term and mid-term strategies that the government is taking to try to navigate the current crisis. And I mean, I think it's fair to say that although you believe in phasing out fossil fuel and increasing the focus on renewables, and although Robert Habeck has talked about the Energiewende and that being something that will take time, I guess the question is, do you see Germany moving forward more quickly in light of the current crisis to try to make this energy transition happen?
Yes, definitely. I think there's really a window of opportunity at the moment. For example, I talked about my election district before. It's a really rural area, and it's a really conservative area. The conservatives have won this district forever. Actually, has not been a time when it was not won by a conservative. And when I talked to the mayors there a few months ago, a few years, last year, and we talked about renewable energies, they were like, oh, well, we don't really know. They were not really up for it. And this has really changed, because now they see this is a question of security of the people living within this district. It's a question of national security. So I think on the short term, there will be hard decision when it comes to renewable energies. For example, LNG terminals. We are now building LNG terminals to get gas from other parts of the world, because we can't be this fast when we want to go out of fossil fuels from Russia within this year. We can't be fast enough to supplement it with renewable energies. But we are saying now we are diversifying, but it has to go hand in hand with a long-term strategy, how to get fully independent of fossil fuels, and therefore 100% renewable energies. And suddenly there's conservatives pushing for this, there's liberals pushing for this, because they see it as a matter of national security. So I am really convinced we'll get faster as Germany, we'll get faster as Europe, and we will say goodbye to fossil fuels, actually.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Ricarda. I'd now like to come back to a topic that we've touched on a little bit and that I know is near and dear to you, namely gender equity. You touched on it a little bit earlier. You, of course, were part of the negotiations of the Koalitionsvertrag, the coalition agreement between the Social Democrats, the Free Democrats, and the Greens, and worked on the equality section. And I think it would be very interesting for our viewers to hear from you what your priorities are when it comes to gender equity, and how to hear from you how this coalition government will promote gender equity.
Well, this was actually a really interesting time for me to negotiate this, because even though there's always hard times in negotiation, I think when you look at the last 16 years, and I think Angela Merkel as a chancellor, as a woman, I really, really respect her, and I think she has done so much for this country. But the coalition of the conservatives in many ways has also been withholding progress. Withholding progress has already taken action within the society. So I think when you look at the last years, you could really see our society was on the other point than our coalition and our government. So, and I think now we have the opportunity that the life reality of so many people, when it comes to rainbow families, when it comes to families that want to share the work, also the childcare, these realities are finally being introduced when it comes to our government, and finally also shaping the political realities, and are no longer being withheld, being ignored, being pushed against, but they are actually shaping our political reality. And therefore, it's really fun actually to negotiate this part within our negotiation paper, coalition paper, which is also, I think, which really fits the subject. We called it like the coalition of progress. And I think this fits really well when it comes to society politics. Three things that are really important for me. First, and this is also the thing I focus on within the parliament, is equal pay. Germany is really far behind when it comes to equal pay, which means that women still earn a lot less, I think 18% less than men in general, which has two major causes. One is direct discrimination when it comes to wage discrimination. For example, an architect earns more than a female architect. And the other one is that jobs with a high percentage of women having these jobs. For example, when it comes to Pflege, so care, the whole care sector, childcare, they are earning proportionally really badly. And I think this is something that needs to change. And we want to have two ways. On the one hand, increasing the investments in the care sector, and on the other hand, improving the rights of the people going against wage discrimination. So more transparency, and also having the rights also to go to court against wage discrimination. The second part is reproductive rights. In Germany, abortions are still part of our Strafgesetzbuch, so part of not just
criminal justice system.
The criminal justice system, which I think really this should not be a criminal question, how we talk about abortion, but it should actually be a healthcare question. And then we can talk about the certain set of rules and how to handle this, but it should not be a criminal, but a healthcare system. And one thing we are as a first step doing is that we're saying we are abolishing the so-called paragraph 219A. This is part of our criminal code, which forbids doctors that are doing abortions to inform about what they are doing. So it's called like a promotional prohibition, but actually it's an information, prohibiting information. And I think this does not fit modern society. This does not fit a society of equality, and therefore we are abolishing this rule and giving better access to healthcare and also to reproductive rights. And the third part, which is also personally rather dear to my heart, because my mom has been working in a so-called Frauenhaus, which is a place where women who are facing violence and who are facing domestic violence can go to get support. And we are now bettering or improving the financiation of those, I don't know how you call it, women's houses.
Centers or homes or
the centers. And Germany actually, on each day in Germany, a man tries to kill his wife or ex-wife, and on each third day he's successful. So we have a big problem when it comes to femicides, and a big problem when it comes to domestic violence, and therefore to protect women from domestic violence and to give them a place of protection. This has also been really important for me personally, and also for us as a coalition.
And it sounds like sort of a
going to change my place because I look kind of like I have a halo behind me.
It did get a little bright, but that's okay. So it does sound like what you're focused on really is increased awareness in a number of different areas. And so maybe one topic I'd like to ask a little bit more about is sort of the workforce and the transformation of employment. There was a recent paper that was published by the Jacques Delors Institute that talked about mandatory quotas for boards and that they can be effective. It went on to say that countries that have them, like France, the Netherlands, and Germany, have had a much faster increase in female representation on their boards. But there's more to including women in the workforce than just including them on boards. And you've talked a little bit about the cost of childcare, the difficulty of childcare in places like Germany. Do you think that the German workforce is changing? And do you think that there are more opportunities for women?
I think it is definitely changing. I think also what people want is actually changing. So I see a lot of women who want to work to play a bigger role and also be successful, but also many men who want to be an active part of their children's life. So many couples that actually want to share loan work and also childcare support and care work. And I think this is really good, but they are still, there's a lot of hurdles, so a lot of obstacles in their way. Yeah, a lot of hurdles. When it comes, for example, to our tax system actively supports mostly those people where there's like a big spread, where there's one person earning a lot and one person earning very little to nothing, which is like kind of this traditional way of there's like the provider. There's like one person who earns for the whole family, and there's one person who takes care of the children and the household. And so I think that there is something changing, but we need to put these changes into political changes as well. I think quotas are one important step, and they're also necessary. There's always like, when you talk about quotas, the debate gets so, I think, flustered within Germany, and so like kind of a little bit hysterical also sometimes, where I would always say, well, nobody likes quotas. Nobody stands up in the morning and says, well, I would like to impose a quota somewhere. But we actually see, and I see coming from a party which has always had quotas and therefore has had a really good representation of women. When you imagine it, there's like a woman running a marathon, there's a man, then the woman gets 3 more obstacles standing in her way. And of course, then in the end, she will be in the goal later or in the finishing area than the man. But this is not because she is naturally worse at her job or anything, but because these obstacles are there. So we have to think about how to get these obstacles out of the way, which is also a question of chance justice, of having the same chances. And therefore, I would say, well, there's always like people saying, well, I don't want quota because I don't want gender to play a role when it comes to who gets a job. I would say, well, I don't want gender to play such a big role, which is exactly why I am proposing quota, because at the moment we actually have like an invisible quota in many areas. And I think that formal quotas can kind of open the door for chance equality. But like you already said, and I would wholeheartedly agree with you, this is one measure, but there's so many other things we need. And I think for me, 2 things are really important. One I've already talked about now is the tax system. So what kind of families do we support as a state? And I would say a state is not there to tell people how to live. So the state should not support a certain kind of family where one person provides for the whole family, but it should support where children are being based. So we have like a free child guarantee where we say, well, children should be supported. People taking care of each other should be supported, but not one way of living within a society should be supported. And the other one, and I think this will really like be a debate that has only just really started in Germany, is the question of time, the question of time politics. Because we have like a 40-hour week. And I think if you look at it, this 40-hour week, it's really like based on the thought of one person going to work, the other person staying at home. And I think in a more like liberal way of thinking about feminism, it ends at the place where we say, well, so women should also work full-time now. But if you have two people, parts of a couple working 40 hours, all these other hours that you need for care work, they are not just going into thin air, they're still there. And then this means normally either the woman is on top of her work, which is so exhausting, or this work is pushed to other women, mostly migrant women, mostly poor women, which, well, it's not like the result we really should like aim at. And therefore, I think we need to talk about work hours and also about the reducing of labor work hours and a new understanding of time politics. And I think this is something that really is interesting and is just starting in Germany.
Ricarda, I think what you're really talking about is how to go about leveling the playing field and increasing access and opportunity for everyone. And that leads to my final question, because we're quickly running out of time here. You mentioned families just now, and you talked about rainbow families a little bit earlier in our conversation. So I'd like to look past gender, because in your career, you've been a staunch advocate for LGBTQI plus rights. And so how are the Greens promoting these rights in Parliament, but also in the government agencies where they're in control?
I think this is something we were talking about. I think we have said that what we are experiencing at the moment, which in Germany is kind of a little bit like a queer revolution, because so many things have been withheld within the last years, and now suddenly they're, well, put into reality. A few years ago in Germany, we have had the introduction of the gay marriage. And this was something really important for so many people. But the government before us just kind of stopped there. So for 3 years, they were always saying, oh, we did enough for the LGBTIQ community. We did gay marriage. Well, and it does not end with marriage. And even though this was important for so many people, and I was always also celebrating in front of the parliament when it came. So I think now we are saying, well, we need to think about LGBTIQ politics within a whole area. So we talk about healthcare, especially we are abolishing the so-called Transsexuellengesetz, which pathologizes trans people, and kind of it treats being trans as an illness where like a psychiatrist needs to kind of like analyze you. And we want to replace this law with a self-determination law, where we say, well, people should self-determine how they want to live within our society. We are having a national plan against discrimination against LGBTIQ. And I think also what has been a big step for us, we are, for the first time within Germany, we are having a queer Beauftragter, so a person within the government that is working for queer rights. Sven Lehmann, a party colleague of mine, a dearly beloved colleague of mine. And so also on the power level, we're saying, well, LGBTIQ rights is not nice to have. It's a question of how we live as a society and what respect and democracy means for us. And we also show this within our government.
Well, Ricarda, a herzlichen Dank to you from the American Council on Germany and from the Heinrich Böll Stiftung. I threw a lot of different topics your way, a lot of different questions, and we covered a lot of ground in the hour that we spent together. But I found each of your responses to be very thoughtful and very thought-provoking. And certainly I will be thinking about our conversation today for some time to come. I hope our viewers will as well. But really, many thanks to you for taking the time to talk with us today.
It was my pleasure, and thank you very much for having me. I hope we stay in contact.
Absolutely. Stay well.
Bye.